Hey everyone, welcome to Monique.vc. I'm Monique Woodard, and please go ahead and like this video and also subscribe to the channel. Today's interview guest is Bernadette Aulestia. Bernadette started her career in media and entertainment at Turner Broadcasting, then went to Univision, and then to HBO, where she launched HBO Latino, as well as a bunch of other HBO products, eventually moving up the ranks to become president of global distribution. And then she left. She left HBO after 22 years. And she's seen media evolve from cable to broadcast to streaming, but she knew that she had a different path to take. And I think it's super powerful when someone just knows that there is something more out there for them than the thing that they've been doing for 2 decades. Bernadette is also on the board of directors of Denny's, Denny's, and she's a powerhouse board member and executive, and has a lot of perspective on the future of media and entertainment, as well as how large corporations, as well as smaller startups, should be thinking about some of the things we talk about: emerging demographics, the new majority, and where those people play in the future of business. So I'm very excited to talk to Bernadette. I'm excited to share this interview with all of you. Again, like it, subscribe to it, and let's get into it. Today we're here with Bernadette Aulestia, who is a seasoned executive, had a very long career at HBO, then left HBO and is now working really closely with startups and is on the board of Denny's. And I really just wanted to talk to you today because we have been getting to know each other, and I think you have such a good perspective on media and entertainment and what sort of this new normal has brought around streaming opportunities, as well as being on a public board. So I thought you would be the perfect person to talk to and interview today. So thank you for coming and chatting with us.
Awesome.
Let's just dive right in. I really want to talk about everyone knows that you were an executive at HBO, but let's go before that and talk about your background, a little bit about how you grew up, and then how you got into the corporate world.
All right, great. Yeah. So let's go all the way back. So by the way, thank you for having me. I love you, love what you do. So I'm always happy to, if this conversation can in any way contribute and be meaningful to people, that's awesome. So yeah, a little bit of my background. So I'm an immigrant to this country, and I find it even more important to say nowadays. I really am really proud of the trajectory of my life, frankly. And came to this country to go to college. I'm from Ecuador originally, and went to study, actually went to school as an engineer. There's a whole other conversation about my generation and that time. I certainly am one of these women who I wish I'd had more women around me to kind of help me stick with it. So my story is, I came as an engineer, found myself, in a class of just 8 women. Pretty much at the end of that first year, I decided that I was going to opt to do something different. Looking back, I really do wish I'd kind of stuck with it. But, especially being a foreign student, I didn't have a network, when I came. And so, and to the degree that my parents had, my father certainly has an education, but he's been educated outside the country. I think that the U.S. college experience was also just very new, and I was navigating that on my own. Transition to economics, and always was very interested, coming from Latin America, in development studies, in particular women in the third world, financing and women and lending. And so actually studied economics, but also with a dual degree in development studies, and spent all my summers interning with the UN, with CARE, really with non-governmental agencies, thinking that that was going to be my trajectory. I actually took the United Nations entrance exam when I graduated, but I also met someone, and boy's definitely part of the story. And he was a New Yorker, a Harlemite, and it was at the time my parents were living in Malaysia, and it was either go to Malaysia or figure out some sort of role in Asia, or try and figure out something that worked at both my professional goals as well as my personal goals. So, investment banking at the time, recruited on campus, I was like, you know what, I'll be able to afford an apartment, be able to eat, and be able to date this guy and see where it goes. So bet well made, though. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary of marriage last week. We have 3 kids, so yeah, all good. It worked out. I'm normally not one
I love
to
that this is
advise.
all about a boy.
And it's funny, I have 3 girls, but I definitely always advise them, don't follow the boy. So, but anyway, that's a little bit of my background, but I tell you that because I started in investment banking, and I have a conversation often with women about sometimes the choices that we've made in our careers are really more pragmatic. It was less of a, what's my dream job and let me go for it. I mean, there was just really pragmatic decisions that you were making based on what you could afford, being able to pay rent. So I think when people look at me now and they think, wow, she had this long career in media, I got to be honest with you, I'm not a person who grew up even knowing that there was careers in media. I'm not a person who grew up saying I want to work in television. I really just kind of happened to stumble my way into an incredible industry. So very grateful that it worked out. But my path originally was more about being personally successful in a foreign country, which ultimately became my home country. But I like I said, my decisions were certainly very pragmatic, and I hear that a lot in women, especially at later stages in their careers. Maybe it wasn't a boy, but you were making decisions based on having kids or the timing or family situations that you needed to tend to. So it's interesting that women find their path and ultimate success and gratification in their careers, which is amazing. But I do talk to a lot of women who actually have become accidental tourists of their own careers. Some of them very successful, but all of them, if you ask them, what's your passion? Like, is this what you envisioned you wanted to be when you grew up? And a lot of them are like, no, I'd love to own a bakery. There's all these other dreams, which, listen, at this stage in my career, we'll get it to that. For me, this is about exploring that having the freedom to now explore some of those passions that I kind of had to put away while I was, building my life and my career and my economic stability.
Yeah. I mean, we always hear this phrase, oh, follow your dreams, do what you're passionate about, and the money will follow. And I think so many women and immigrants and people of color don't have that option, and, end up having to do what you did, which was, take the pragmatic role, take the, investment banker route, and which is, obviously a very stable job. You're going to get a paycheck every 2 weeks, you're going to get great benefits and be able to kind of build that nest egg that maybe you didn't grow up with. But that means leaving some other things on the back burner. It could be, leaving entrepreneurship on the back burner. It could be leaving, your desire to be a creative or be a writer or whatever it is. You're then forced to make some real, pragmatic decisions. How did you go from making that pragmatic decision to moving into something that was more fulfilling?
So there's 2 times in my life, and I know we're going to get to the second time, which is how did I decide that I actually was, ready to move on from this long career in media at HBO. But there's 2 moments in my life that, and by the way, this early moment informed my second moment. And so so it's awesome that we're going to talk about it. So, I definitely went into investment banking. By the way, I think it's one of the best boot camps. I tell people all the time, I especially when you look at kind of my type of career, right? General management, operations, global operations, people who aspire to run companies, having a financial background and kind of having literacy in terms of kind of corporate finance and the markets becomes extraordinarily important later on in your career. I, again, also know a lot of extraordinarily talented chief marketing officers, women who've kind of taken a less kind of a path that hasn't touched finance as much, who oftentimes later on in their careers, as they're looking at being considered for, can you run the whole enterprise? This question comes up about kind of facility with the financial side of a company. So, for young people coming out of school, people are always like, would you say not to do the investment banking thing? And I'm a huge fan. I think consulting is another great boot camp. I think it teaches you, especially for those who have not had the benefit of generations of, how to enter the workforce. You learn so much about not just how physically business is done and the tactical stuff, but you actually, I think for a lot of people, it's kind of the first entrance into like this professional work environment. So started there, but pretty quickly knew, I told you I was an econ major, but I'd done primarily development studies work. So I knew that corporate finance really wasn't where I wanted to be. Was lucky enough that, look, I worked in emerging markets. And so for somebody who's, interested in global markets, I grew up I'm from Ecuador, grew up in Latin America, but also grew up in Asia. So love working in global environments. And so that was really great. But I knew that at the end, when everybody was off to figure out business school, that I'd need to figure out something else. That something else actually happened to me, which was the investment bank I worked was acquired. And again, talk about making a pragmatic, safe choice, only to find myself a little bit over a year in a M&A transaction in a class of, still remember to this day, they brought all 35 of us analysts into a conference room and gave us had little packages on the desk. And that was my first layoff. So for me, what was interesting though, is that I had experience in the media sector. I was borrowed as an analyst, made, I guess, a fairly good impression on the transaction team at Turner at the time. And so when that was happening and we were given some time, somebody on the transaction side, on the client side, said to me, listen, are you interested at all in, do you want to go business schools? And I was like, no, I don't think I'm going to take time off and apply. I just need to find another job. And they said, well, would you consider working for us on the client side in finance? And I said, absolutely. And at the time, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., car pickups, going home. I tell people all this time, my roommate and I rarely saw each other. We lived 3 blocks from Central Park, and I'd never been to the park. It was that, kind of lifestyle.
Investment is a grind for an analyst.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's gotten a little bit better. At the time, you were definitely paying your dues. So, so the idea of a job that, was going to pay me half of what I made, which was a really big gamble for someone like me who tends to plan things out. But I'd be able to, I remember his selling point was like, you're done at 5:30. And I just at the time thought, wow, I'm in New York. I'm supposed to be experiencing everything about this new life. And I barely have time to see, by the way, the guy that we talked about, I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to buckle up, eat mac and cheese every day, and I'm going to do this. And this is going to be great. So it was I think it was like a lifestyle choice as well. And certainly felt like a really big risk at the time, but I felt ready. I just felt like I was ready for something else. And so jumped into that. And that was my first, I'd never worked in a media company. So it was just, I supported the advertising team. So learning all that, learning that the industry as a whole at the time, this is like the 90s, mid 90s, and it was just booming. We had gone from, broadcast television to cable networks to premium cable networks. And so I'm a student of business models for sure. I love that. for me, it was like, where does the money come from, right? And so I knew I worked in advertising, but I was like, wait, what is this other area? And they get money from distributors and they license product all over the world. So I definitely became very much enamored with like all the possible ways that the industry really generates jobs and wealth. And so for me, once I was there, I was hooked.
Yeah. And then at some point you were able to move into HBO. Tell us about that transition, because that's really kind of the tipping point, the inflection point, or one of the inflection points for your career.
For sure. Yeah. So it's funny, when I did what I did back then, my father totally frowned. He was like, I went to Turner, I was there a year, and then I was approached about this opportunity to go work for Univision, and they were starting their cable division, and it was like a jack of all trades startup situation. It was like, look, you're a financial analyst, you've done decks, you know PowerPoint, somehow knowing PowerPoint translated into, do you want to be the marketing department? Like, it was crazy times. So, but it was like, it felt like this great opportunity. And like I said, at the time, you know, staying at a job for a year was like crazyville. It was almost like career suicide. This idea that people later would look at you and say, you haven't stayed in jobs. Nowadays, like, it's all the rave, right?
Yeah, a year is fine now. People hop around all the time, especially in startups.
Exactly. So, but I did it. And I got to tell you, I'm very driven by relationships, and I'm very passionate about being inspired by the people I work with and around. And at the time, the team there was just dynamic and amazing. And by the way, Latino, which at the time was like, wow, I get to be surrounded by community. And so awesome. Javier Saralegui, Luli Estevez, I mean, this just powerhouse, you know, all like top-notch schools, like just amazing people that were making things happen. So I went over there and you know, had kind of a little, I definitely did my financial side, work on deals, but got to taste all of it. Literally, like, created marketing pamphlets for people at a time when they were just getting started, went on sales calls, like just kind of got to like suck that in. And that was amazing and fantastic. And I was there for 3 years. And then serendipity, somebody I knew worked at HBO. They were also ramping up their multicultural efforts, and, you know, already a very successful brand, but trying to figure out how do we better connect with African American and Latino audiences. And so my friend said, would you be interested at all in taking that leap? And and that was the beginning of that. I talked to them, and once again, it felt like a career that, you know, something that I could build on, where I'd be able to, you know, do a variety of different things.
And so you went and you were really focused on the multicultural audience, the Latino audience in particular. Did you ever feel pigeonholed by that?
Yeah, so that's another great story I do tell people. I went in, kicked butt. I had great management, I got to tell you. Was lucky that I actually had a lot of female leadership too. Really amazing women who've gone on to be incredible executives across different industries. So I felt very supported. Went in and, you know, worked on new launches, new products. We launched a Latino network.
Launched HBO Latino, not just a Latino network.
HBO Latino, and
this little thing called HBO Latino.
And it was, you know, and it was amazing. And at a really young age was given responsibility, was given budgets. I mean, it was just an incredible experience. I agree with you though. What happened though, I started to notice over time, was that sometimes in conversations or meetings with senior management, when it came to expertise around marketing and new product development and new product launches, and it was about ethnic things, it was like, oh, Bernie, why don't you tell us what you think? Same skill set applies when you're trying to get subscribers who are non-ethnic, but it just I could feel it. There was like a little line where I felt like, wow, I think they see me as super successful when it comes to what I do, but I want to be seen as someone who can be successful doing any of these things. And And so I made a hard choice at the time. You know, listen, we launched the product. A little bit is also personal preference. I tend to like working on things when they're nascent and we're pulling it all together, and then we get it running, and then it's like, once it's like kind of cruising along, I'm happy to like
Yeah.
find, develop, nurture talent, and then I kind of want to move on to the next, like, what else can we solve? So
Yeah.
so there was a little bit of that, but there definitely was intentional. I need them to see me as that I can do more than just multicultural. And so I went to my boss at the time, which, by the way, African American woman, powerhouse, Olivia Smasham, unbelievable. And she was such a mentor in so many ways. And I remember saying to her, Olivia, I feel like I'd like to take on a different challenge. And I remember she was like, but you just launched HBO Latino and it's your baby. And I said,
Yeah.
yeah, but I feel like for my future career, if I'm going to be seen successfully running other things, I want to do something different. And she was so supportive, and you know, definitely best advice I ever got from her for my career standpoint is she always used to tell me, always don't ever take your foot out of where the money is made. And I remember at the time I was like, well, you know what? I kind of want to get closer to that. So put me on, I'd love to understand the distribution side, the market subscription side. So she put me in, there was an opportunity to do subscriber on the subscriber marketing side. Online marketing had just come on. So, you know, developing a database, figuring out how to talk to customers. So, so I was lucky. I was lucky that I asked, and two, that the person who I was having this conversation with completely understood where I was coming from and helped facilitate that movement. And then I got to tell you, after that, it definitely changed the perception and my profile. And so I think it was a good move. I always stayed close, and the multicultural marketing area reported into me for many, many years. And so, you know, never left it, but, you know, wanted to kind of spread my wings a little bit and showcase like my ability across different sectors.
That's a good point, that, you know, you had someone internal who really saw you, and, you know, when you brought that issue up, was able to support you in sort of moving into a different area. But you were sort of early to, and HBO was slightly early to people really recognizing the power of multicultural audiences. Do you think that corporations in particular, or even, you know, smaller startup companies, are recognizing the power of multicultural groups, especially Latinos, or do you think they're still kind of trying to catch up?
You know, listen, I think the younger a company, and I mean physically in age, in terms of like the company, the management, the audience that it's aimed at, I think those are companies that are like already being born out of this kind of new majority world that we're in, right? So I think there's something that innately, you know, in terms of just a company, the products, you know, the audience understands that, you know, the world is different. I think that for more established brands and companies, I think it's been a journey. And I think there's been a lot of peaks and valleys. And there's been a lot of like, let's put some dollars against this. Then we hit like an economic downturn. Ooh, let's like cut the multicultural efforts. So I think there's just a lot of that variability. And I think it's just that some companies haven't been able to sustain. And I think that's more, I think, what we're seeing. And it's interesting because it's a discussion that a lot of us are having, especially after this spring and summer, where a lot of companies actively put forth, well, at least they, you know, blacked out their Instagrams. And now the question is, okay, so is it just a moment in time, or is this something that you're actively going to integrate and completely, you know, systemically change how you do business, how you interact with customers? So, so I think that part is also like TBD, but I'm encouraged by seeing it. I still think though that oftentimes those initiatives are born out of some sort of, rather than looking at the economic power of our markets and the fact that like you can make money.
Yeah.
It's almost like this nice to do thing, and let's do
It
the
comes
right
as a part
thing.
of their social responsibility, social
Yes,
justice
yes,
lens, and not a revenue and finance and profit lens, which it
uh-huh,
totally is. I mean,
yeah,
it can be both things at once, but if you look at the power of Latinos and you look at the power of the African American dollar, you look at the power of these dollars, it's a revenue choice that you're making, right?
yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with you. I think the tell for me is when you look at post this summer, where have companies put the responsibility for making sure that they're meeting the needs of really, like I said, the new majority.
Mhm.
And if it's just CSR, then I don't see it as kind of this longstanding, meaningful thing. I think the companies that have charged and made compensation part of this conversation with their operating leaders, I mean, I think that those are really the folks that are putting kind of their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, 100% agree. Um, so you were at HBO at a really interesting time when they were moving from cable and into broadband, and now we're seeing them go even further into digital, with HBO Now and streaming and all of the standing up all of those products. Um, did you feel that these legacy media brands were a little slow to the party when it came to like really recognizing that people are cutting the cord and that there is a whole new customer behavior out here that they should be capitalizing on?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, yes. By the way, I know people give HBO a ton of credit for doing what it did when it did, but I would say we all internally also would say it was, I feel like we were like 2 years too late. And I mean, look, there's a lot of different reasons, including um, the way that media companies are valued, and the kind of structural impediments that kind of the business arrangements that have been made to make these companies successful today kind of began to impede the ability to really be very aggressive. But I go back to also just the way that they're valued made it difficult. I think one of the things that people didn't quite understand about HBO at the time being a part of the Time Warner, right, a public company, HBO being really a cash cow for the company. And when Wall Street is looking at you on a quarterly basis, evaluating kind of the valuation of your company, and you depend on the cash of a company, subsidiary of HBO, it becomes incredibly difficult to kind of wean people off that. And the idea that instead of taking that profit, we're going to reinvest it in our content, in the way really that Netflix did, right? Which again, valued very differently as a growth stock, but really was able to basically continue to operate at a loss, right? Just because they're able to just take anything and reinvest. And so I would say, look, there were structural reasons why. By the way, I am a huge fan of our CEO at the time, Jeff Bewkes, who I think will go down, and especially after the AT&T deal. I mean, look, definitely brought shareholder value, and will be lauded for that. But yeah, I think being CEO of a public company, that is tough. And we'll get into boards because I think that's a very appropriate
Yeah.
conversation. But not to make an excuse, but I think it's just important for people to understand why media companies were so slow. It's not that they didn't see customers. I believe me, there's plenty of people inside these companies clamoring and saying, look, I'm a user, help, let's get this moving. But I think there was just a lot of structural impediments, which by the way, always happens, right, with incumbents. And so I think I think now you're seeing NBC Universal and Peacock and, Hulu was kind of early, the media industry trying to do something.
Very early.
And then now, certainly we launched HBO Now, which was really bold at the time. But obviously since I've departed and AT&T bought the company, and it's interesting to see someone like Jason come back from the helming Hulu to now running Warner Media. You can see, their intent is to really double down on kind of the digital narrative and and the future of really how consumers now are consuming media. People want what they want, when they want, how they want it, and they expect the brands that they love to be in all the places that they consume. So so it's been a crazy transition, which, by the way, people always tell me, how could you were at HBO for so long? And I'm like, yeah, but it felt like, it's like dog years. There was just so much, it was a time where there was just so much change in the company in terms of the model itself. And I said this earlier, that I'm a student of business models. It's what kept me was that every few years we were kind of having to reinvent the way we've done business. And I love that.
Yeah. And it feels like now we're in the middle of another evolution, because I think COVID-19 and shelter in place has completely changed, one, the pace at which people are consuming content, and changed the ways in which we consume content. What is the next evolution of media and entertainment that you're interested in seeing, or that you're kind of noticing on the horizon?
I think, people used to talk about, and this is what's interesting about the pandemic. It's not that all of these ideas and kind of what we're seeing weren't already in development. I think what the pandemic has done is basically accelerated and taken so much into the mainstream, right? And so, the fact that we're doing this, right? Like, and by the way, and this is like, you're creating professional content in essence, right? It's like, It's almost like the barriers of entry into creating content. No, I love it. I love your lighting. I'm the one who needs like a better setup here. Hide my laundry behind me. So, but I think what's interesting is that the barriers of entry to creating professional or semi-professional content are so much lower, right? So, you look at TikTok, you look at like what constitutes content now. It's not necessarily this long form, super high production, scripted content. I mean, content is very personal, right? And content can be a conversation, it could be a podcast. I mean, so, I think that the expansion of content continues. Now, look, if I was to say what excites me about what used to be seen as way down the line, now I don't think, because of the world, what we've experienced is, people used to say, well, AR, VR, that's kind of down there. You look at applications today. Look, my kids are doing hybrid remote. They're in school every other day. They're installing these 360 video cameras so that the kids can at least have the experience when they're home of being able to kind of look around the room and see the peers that are there. So, and to me, those are the beginnings of like augmented reality. Yes, virtual reality, right? Like, I'm sure industries like the concert industry, I mean, there's so many industries that, believe me, they're not going to go away. There's just going to be iterations of how do you have the communal experience, but perhaps using technology in different ways, right? A place where, I remember a few years back, I was a Techstar mentor for about 8 years. And I remember in one class, we had a company that was doing VR sports viewing, like, you guys call it soccer, but, football in the rest of the world, and European soccer in particular. And at the time, it seemed like super. I remember somebody saying, this is very Flash Gordon, which, by the way, dates the person who was saying it. But it was these virtual rooms. You could watch, a FIFA game, whatever game you wanted to watch. And if your friends had obviously the same devices, you could be in the room together. It was like you were sitting on the couch. You could look at your friend. You could chit chat. Like, I think those applications, as futuristic as they sounded at the time, I think at a time where we're trying to figure out how to stay connected, I think it's only going to catapult things like that. A company that I'm investing in right now, and this is, I know it's interesting to you too, is in the aging space, right? Where when we can't be connected, what happens to grandma? What happens to mom and dad? How do we create and maintain digital connections? How do we care for people in an environment where we physically can't be there in order to assist them? So to me, those are I think content and entertainment and media, to me, also has all of these applications that have to do with human connection. Because that's really, why do I love HBO? Why was I there for so long? I believed in the power of the stories we were telling, that we were trying to tell stories that nobody else was telling in a way that hadn't been seen before. And to me, that fundamentally is about a connection that you have emotionally, with a brand and what it makes you feel. So I think applications in media that begin to, kind of bridge the digital divide we're all feeling are the things that I think are going to be the future.
And, you came from a legacy media brand, but, more recently, you're also starting to kind of work with newer media brands. What do you think it takes to create something new in that space today?
I think it's still tough, especially in media, because talk about the bar of entry in terms of the business is so high, right? It's like, if you're creating professional content, it's expensive. You're competing with players who have, gobs of money. So I always tell companies, and, I'm involved in actually 3 nascent, media companies. It really boils down to the business model, right? And finding ways to really early on monetize and gain some scale and traction. So, a lot of the similar things that we saw kind of in the gaming and the app world industry, I think apply, where people are going out with freemium products really in order to get audience, to get mass, to get scale. I think a lot of people are looking now at launching global markets at the same time, because, listen, the market for many of this type of entertainment, is mass in other regions of the world, which, by the way, as someone who comes from abroad, I love it. It's like, hello, there's the rest of the world,
Right here,
and,
yeah.
who loves and consumes. And so I think those are the 2 things. It's like, what's the business model? Listen, the ad market is really challenged right now. So advertising supported propositions are I think tough, and they're tough to sell to investors. Subscription, come from the subscription, the OG subscription economy. So I'm a huge fan of subscription, and I'm a huge fan of building multiple layers of subscription. Mm-hmm. So base level products, building things on top of that. Again, back to scale, once you build community, the importance of owning your platform, owning your data, because if you don't know who these customers are, how they're consuming, how are you generating the next product layers that you're going to begin to continue monetizing? So I spend a lot of time, because I love it. I love founders. Yeah. Trying to help people think about those things. And yes, some of my OG ideas are still very pertinent. I think kind of subscription is subscription. And, the methodologies may have changed, but the underlying still remains the same. And so I'm a fan of people who are building, low price entry points or no price entry points, but then ultimately looking to build community that they can then build subscription products on top of.
Yep. 100% agree with that. So you were at HBO for how long?
22 years.
22 years.
I started when I was 15.
That's right. What was your position when you left?
So I was president global distribution. So by the time I ended my trajectory, mm-hmm. I was responsible for our global operations and revenue, and which is cool, as somebody who, again, kind of came up doing a lot of different jobs, by the way, in that time I was there. And I think ultimately made me hopefully successful at the end job, is that I'd done at least 70% of the roles that people have reported into me. Yeah, phenomenal. I mean, it's a $7 billion business and 1,300 employees across the world. And so, and being able to dabble in all the things I love, which is just the continued innovation, continued new business models, international markets. It's been a lot of fun. It was a really, really fun ride.
That's a long run. So how did you know that it was time to leave and to find something else, that it was time for
So
the next act?
yeah, so I got a little help. So back to my story I told you originally, second time that an external force has kind of come in,
Yeah.
is the company was acquired by AT&T last year. And, for those who follow media, you remember the acquisition was supposed to have happened 2 years prior, but the Department of Justice sued. And so there was a 2-year M&A process. And, somebody who kind of oversaw one of the, the revenue for one of the operating units, was very much involved in this really long process that, by the way, when it's long, makes it even more painful, right? People are already unsettled. Of course, a new company coming in is going to want to change things and is going to move things around. They were taking on a lot of debt in order to buy the company. So, people who are aware were like, obviously layoffs are going to come. There's going to be restructurings. And when you're trying to run what it was a very successful business, while there's all these tumultuous things where people aren't sure about their day-to-day jobs, it's exhausting. And because I've been there for 22 years, this is my family. I felt personally responsible for people and being transparent with them and helping them through the process and understanding what potentially could happen versus not happen. So it was tough. I think for me also what I realized was that the company I'd known, which had operated as, I'd had this amazing, beautiful, made for me general manager role, operating end to end. And now we're being acquired by a much larger company who runs their businesses, because they're so large, very, very differently, much more in a matrixed way. And so for me, I think, look, great conversations leading up to the time where I decided that it was time for me to go. But for me, I realized that the next role would have been a bigger role, but with less responsibility, if that makes sense. Like, it's like a more functional role. And so for me, it just felt like, well, this isn't right, quite what I want to do next. And so I have this amazing team of people that I developed and groomed and left behind, incredible leaders. And so it was like, I remember having this conversation with John Stanky at the time and saying, like, one, I'm ready, and two, you don't even need me. These guys are like awesome, and they will kick ass for you. And so it was good. It just felt, when you just know it's time. There's a little grieving because you feel like, but the company that I'd known didn't exist anymore, and so for me it felt like, all right, job well done. I've done this, and I'm going to take a breather, and then I'm going to reflect on that. Somebody at one point had said to me, if you could close your eyes and think to a moment where you felt freest, when was that? And I said to somebody, I knew the moment, the minute they said it. I remember being 19-year-old, sitting on the green of my college campus, curly hair out, feeling like I could just change the world. And so coming out, I felt like I need to go take some time and refine that 19-year-old girl. So, so when I left last summer, it was bittersweet, but also excitement around, taking some time for myself to figure out, like, where are all those passion things that I maybe, because of my pragmatic choices, that maybe tucked behind, that I can kind of maybe now bring out and kind of start exploring.
And what did you do immediately next?
So was sending one kid off to college, our oldest. So spent the summer cocooning at home and trying to, squeeze every moment out with our eldest. Dropped her off in August. And then we as a family decided to take a sabbatical and head to Costa Rica for school semester. So put my kid in school and I also spent some time in Ecuador, spent a month in the Galapagos. So just a lot of travel. My husband's a psychotherapist and happened to also be in the midst of writing a book. So he wasn't really doing a lot of client work. So it was perfect. I mean, it was like really sent from heaven. It was like we were at this crazy moment in our lives where he was like, yeah, I could do this from somewhere else. And I was like, well, let's go. And we'd always wanted our kids to experience living abroad. So yeah, and for me, being in a Spanish speaking country was also a little bit of like some balm I needed for my soul.
And one of the things that we talked about was, women of color and their hair in the workplace. Early days of COVID were definitely a struggle for a lot of us. But we talked about, you mentioned that 19-year-old who had curly hair and was sitting on, her college campus. And talk about, being free from corporate and being free from, what those expectations might have been, especially, when you started early versus what you're able to do now.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think I realized how much I self-shackled or shackled. I'm not sure. It wasn't until I was done that I realized a lot of things. And by the way, anybody who's known me in my professional capacity at HBO, there is literally the amount of people on my hand that have seen my hair curly, which in itself is a statement. Like, and it's a different time. Look, I feel like when I first started, I remember the first time I wore my hair curly to one of my first meetings at HBO. And I read people and I just remember getting, a look in the room from someone, a senior male executive, and consciously making the decision that I would never wear my hair curly again because I didn't think I'd be seen seriously. And, we could dissect that one. And, but I felt like maybe perhaps then I kind of took on that in order to be successful at this place, I would need to look like someone who could be successful at that place. And I think there's some conforming in there. And so I think times have absolutely changed, which is amazing to see. For people think the media industry is very progressive and liberal, and it is. But, I worked at the corporate entity of an entertainment company. And so, in New York. And so I think, a lot of things came with that. And so I mentioned the curly hair out 19-year-old because to me, that was actually a very spiritual moment when I remembered that. And I felt like, yeah, there's power. There's power in my hair. There's power in fully being able to come and be myself in a place. And I certainly felt when I left that I made a promise to myself that I'd never want to go or be anywhere where I was making myself smaller for either to make someone else feel bigger or to fit in. And so, yeah. So anyway, the curls have been, I had to trim the ends and get them, but they're back. And yeah, it's like a statement, but and I do wear it straight sometimes because sometimes it's easier, but it's amazing, I certainly feel like the decisions I'm making now about this next stage in my career, they're very kind of passion and heart led. I've spent a whole career leading with my head. And I think for me now, it's like a little bit of leading with my heart. Yeah. And so, I want to work with people that I feel passionate about. I want to help people. I love advisory work. I love my board work. I love founders. And I think all of them have something in common, which is like, just passion. So for me, I'm almost like a radar. It's constantly like, and I know we'll talk about this, but for me, like, investments or the people I work with or I advise, how do I decide? A lot of it has to do with whether I see that passion and that commitment,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking of all of the women of color who I've, seen on Twitter talking about their apprehension around wearing braids in the workplace, or can I have my hair braided if I'm in broadcast and on camera? And you know, kind of the angst that we go through
Mm-hmm.
around how to present to the world.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're at a place where you are presenting who you are fully.
Yes, I am too. I am too. So, and by the way, like we were talking earlier, COVID, COVID certainly accelerated that I have no choice. I have no one to blow my hair out.
COVID definitely accelerated the hair acceptance. We mentioned your public board service, and so I really want to bring that into the conversation too.
Mm-hmm.
You're on the board of Denny's.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about how you became a board member at a publicly held company.
Yeah, so this goes back to mentorship and advice. I think I mentioned Jeff Bucas, who was CEO of the company, great mentor. And I remember at a point prior to the acquisition, having lunch and just, soaking in advice. And I remember the conversation about just progression. And I remember he said to me really clearly, you've accomplished all these things, and you've sat on the other side of presenting to a board. But the one piece of experience that's certainly very different is when you're on the other side. And I remember he really encouraged me to, in terms of just thinking about, the next challenge for myself was board service. And so I remember beginning to think about it and beginning to ask questions, starting to kind of just learn a little bit more about, what it would require.
Where did
And
you go to learn?
so I was, again, really fortunate that the Latino Association of Corporate Directors had just started what they call their Board Ready Institute. And somebody had recommended me to them. And I think I was their second class. And it was an entire education. I mean, talk about, and this I think you hear a lot of very capable women leading companies. But then this board service thing, it sounds like it's like some club that you don't know the rules to. And
Yeah.
it was very helpful. And I tell people all the time who ask me, if you have an opportunity to get to do a board readiness, seminar, you learn a lot because, it's a very different animal than being an operator or, and so I think that just kind of understanding the process even itself is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I have to tell you, I do think in the last 12 months, but in particular the last 6 months, you see a lot more movement around opening up, right? What the traditional criteria is and the traditional circles from which people get board names. So that's amazing. There's some fantastic organizations doing that. Women on boards. I mean, there's just a lot of movement of organizations trying to showcase.
List is one really well known.
Yes. Women of color. So it's amazing, and that's been super great. But like I said, it was an education. Like I had a resume. I didn't realize there was like a whole board packet thing, like just simple things like that. I remember actually someone
What goes in the board packet? Tell us what goes in the board packet.
So it's a combination of your resume, but kind of told in a much more high level functional way, right? In terms, because you're really trying to showcase, expertise, functional expertise, rather than the specifics of like, hey, I launched this product, right? And then your bio. And your bio is really this, it's really meant to embody who you are and your philosophy, I would say, right? And so back to someone in one of these board ready instances, I remember someone passing me the card of this professional board packet writer, and I was like, oh, is this like a secret society? Well, apparently, I've sent her name now to like 500 people because I'm like, everybody needs to get one of these, and it was awesome. She kind of helps you really distill your narrative, distill your story, talk about your functional expertise, and talk about the things that obviously, being on a board is less, it's not about the operating side, right? It's not about the strategy. It's not about telling them what to do.
Mhm.
It's really about, you work for the shareholders, first of all, and it's about more the governance, right? And making sure, especially in times like now, and Denny's being, a board member of a company that's in the restaurant business, you can imagine that, what people used to think that board service was, a couple of meeting a quarter, but during times, I think that it's become much more dynamic, and especially when a company is, companies are facing what we're facing right now. It's helping management really make the most sound decisions for the future of the company. So so that was my process. Once I kind of got in it, I realized, wow, there's a lot of people I need to get to know. I've known people in the recruiting world, but more as a client. All of a sudden it was like flipping it, like, oh wait, I need to like get my connects out there. I need to know people, so that I remember someone who's a tremendous executive board member, rock star, Sol Trujillo, said to me at one point, all right, well, so you want to be on a board, have you told anybody? And I was like, oh, okay, that's good advice. He's like, hello, yeah, it's like, if you're ready, you need to now be telling people, obviously, who get calls
I
all the
feel like the
time.
person to tell is Saul. So.
Ah, yeah, yeah.
You're like, I am telling you, actually.
I'm telling you. I remember he was like, well, did you tell Jeff you're ready? Anyway, so, but he was absolutely right. It was like, have I publicly kind of put it out there to people that I think can be helpful? And so, yes, I always thank him for that, because I kind of went on my mission. I was ready. By the way, I tell people, don't do it until you've got your packet and you've got kind of how you're going to present yourself. And then, and then once I really started talking to people, it was great. And then someone called me for the Denny's role, and it just so happened that they're a phenomenal board.
Yeah.
They're an incredibly diverse board. They have an incredible powerhouse chairman of the board, Brenda Lauterbach, who is just an amazing woman, and who is, I think I'm learning, as a woman of color, like, lives diversifying the board, lives, making sure that as a company, the company's thinking, challenges really the company to think constantly about what we talked about, right? The demographics, the economics within the company. How are we developing talent and pipeline? So I feel like it's a whole other education. I told someone, being on a board has probably been the most challenging new challenge professionally for me. I had a big job, but you get good at it. So at some point you feel like you can do it with your eyes closed. Stepping on the board felt like a whole new education, which for someone who's constantly learning, it was amazing. I mean, it's an amazing challenge. And I just feel really fortunate. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. I try to remind people of that. You want values alignment. For me, it was like, I needed to, incredible management, incredible values, diverse board, felt immediately welcomed, and, with the perspective. And, and then it's interesting. A lot of people will also experience it, especially for public companies. Private boards, I think, it's very different. I'm on another board, but public companies, if you're in our age range, you're also kind of on the younger end. And so that in itself is also, I think there's a lot of conversation about how to onboard kind of younger generations of board members.
Yeah.
But I think it's an incredible opportunity both ways. I think companies benefit from diverse, young, different perspectives, closer to their audiences oftentimes. And I think that the person on the board benefits, like I said, just in terms of expansion of skills and taking those skills to the next level.
Definitely. Board diversity has become a major conversation. I would say not just this year, but over the last few years. And just yesterday, Governor Gavin Newsom in California signed legislation that will require the boards of publicly held companies to have at least one racially, ethnically, or otherwise diverse director by the year 2021. And this follows up legislation on gender diversity that came, I believe, last year. So I think a lot of people who will be critical of discussions around board diversity believe that mandating this kind of diverse board representation puts an undue burden on publicly traded companies. What would you say to someone who has that sort of perspective?
I think that the assumption that it's an undue burden comes with another assumption, which is that qualified people aren't available. So, the fact of the matter is that I go back to when you think about the representation of who your customer base is, who your audiences are, and oftentimes who your employees are, it's actually ridiculous oftentimes that, you don't have a more diverse governing board who is really charged with oversight of how the company conducts its external and internal business, matters. So, I know this also began, it's interesting, right? It began first with kind of women, and you're like, yeah, how are you a multinational cosmetics company?
Yeah. How are you?
With all due respect, like, how do you know anything about makeup? So, but across the board, right? You think of companies and you think about the power of social media and how women consume social media, how African American, Latino audiences over-index in a lot of tech products, right? And so, I think if anything, it's more like you scratch your head and wonder, well, it actually feels the other way around, which is almost like you're making an intentional decision to really not, honor, the product, the audience, the customers, your employees, by discreetly operating only in the circles that you have operated in. Because look, let's just go back to that. A lot of it has to do with that. It's like people historically look at their circles, it's like, who am I friends with? Who do I know? Who do I have experience with? Who did I go to school with? Mm-hmm. And we have historically been underrepresented in those circles. Now, like I mentioned, in terms of, for example, my example of having a board chair who, once we're there, our responsibility is to make our circles additive to that conversation. And so, I'm encouraged by that. But I when people say that kind of nonsense, I just shrug, because there's so many incredible qualified. I mean, Stephen Wolf Pereira started this. I love his thing where he's just I don't know, just putting it out there week after week. Like, here's another badass African American executive. Here's another incredible broad-based.
February, every single day, another person. So, when the CEO of Wells Fargo says, well, we can't find
them
qualified, diverse.
You know what? I got binders full of them.
Binders full.
Binders full of women, binders full of minorities.
What about private company boards? Fred Wilson from Union Square Ventures wrote about using the independent board seat as a way to kind of get privately held companies, startups, to start diversifying their boards earlier. Mm-hmm. Do you think that this is a good way to sort of get more diverse representation on the boards of some of the companies who, before they even go public?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll tell you, because another thing that like peeves me right now is that historically for public companies, the spec is, whatever functional crazy expertise you need, right? Like head of industry, but it's like C-suite. Mm-hmm. And, I don't know, I think we all know, it's not breaking news, that if you are putting all these qualifiers and then adding, right? So CEO, C-level, CEO, COO, CFO of a large publicly traded company who's had broad operating responsibilities, and by the way, is a woman and is African American. Well, it's pretty evident to see how many of those there are.
Four, yeah.
Right?
So, you go down the list.
Exactly. So, and I get that, right? Historically, that's been like, well, let's, it's like I used to say, we also, when we used to do hires, we used to historically just put at the bottom MBA preferred. I don't know why that became like a thing. We didn't necessarily need you to have your MBA, but it just started to become this like boilerplate. And I think there's a little bit of that. What's really what people are looking for is deep level expertise and some expertise, having sat on a board and understanding the difference between operating and governance, right? So to me, absolutely, private board experience absolutely is the gateway, in my opinion, to getting more people over the hump of, well, this isn't somebody who's already served on another public board. Well, no, it's their first public board experience, but they've had experience. And I actually think that the pace of public versus private is different. I think for people where this is your first experience, on private, it's almost much more consultative, right? There's much more hands-on expertise that you can provide, opinions that you can provide, which I think sometimes is a little bit of a jump for people when you realize that when you go onto a public board company, no, you're not. If you are an ex-CMO, your job isn't to sit with a new CMO and tell them what your opinions and ideas are. So I think private company boards are phenomenal for that. And I actually like the pace of them too. I think especially for people, and this I tell people all the time, people say, I want to be on a board. I want to be on a board. Well, ask yourself why you want to be on a board. I think it's important to understand why you want to be on a board. If you want to be on a board because you love the strategy side, helping businesses grow and scale and succeed, you actually might have more fun on a private board where there's much more of that kind of hands-on expertise that is required. So I always tell people, make sure you understand, why do you want to be on a board? Because I think that will also help define what kind of board you should be on.
Absolutely. And what's the biggest piece of advice that you could give anyone who wants to, start their board service?
I definitely think you need to kind of start with your story, right? Well, definitely, why do you want to be on a board? Because by the way, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of responsibility. Yeah. And I started on the board when I was still at HBO, and my goodness, it was just like, I don't even know how I stretched myself so thin in many ways. But so I always tell people also, just understand, where are you in your life and responsibilities and trajectory. And because I think it's important to understand the commitment that you're making when you do that. So I think that's the first piece, is understand, like, why do I want to be on a board? And maybe what's the right fit? And then I would say the second piece definitely is that board packet, telling your narrative, your story in a way that immediately people can understand what value you would bring. And then that third piece is Saul's advice. You got to let people know you want to do it. You got to tell people if you want to do it. It's not going to go anywhere if it's just you saying, oh, I want to be on a board. So, and not really, not to be, not to make it like too light, but I think at the end of the day, that's the networking piece, right? It's all networks. And so making sure that you're building those networks. I tell people all the time, you're dealing with large recruiters, and so many of us get into our more relationship just because I'm trying to fill a job. Well, realizing that those are long-term relationships, and that those are the very people who eventually can really be instrumental in terms of helping you land a new board position. So I think the networking becomes like next level networking.
Yeah. I'm really glad that we're getting to know each other at this time when you are sort of growing personally and professionally and starting to think about what's next for you. How do you make sure that you're continuing to evolve and kind of reach for that next big thing?
I'm definitely a person that, like, my energy is fed by other people's energy. So this time has actually been hard for me because I tend to like to be able to see you and, but so I think it's kind of, I too try to be fairly active in terms of maintaining my engagement. And honestly, the best way I know how to maintain my engagement right now is to ask people if they need help. And I don't need anything in return. I guess I am lucky. I'm at the stage and I just want to give, I have all this knowledge, I have all this experience, and I want to be around people who need that and who need that in this moment. And it's one of the reasons why I love advisory work and working with founders, because oftentimes it's a lot of people who are passionate about what they're bringing forth. Sometimes not people who have historically had experience scaling into like being a real organization or being a boss even. And so if any of my advice or my experience can kind of help people mature into that, what it takes to be not just an amazing genius at what you've developed, but also a really successful and empathetic person that can build a business for the long term, that's what gets me going. So yeah, so right now there's just a lot of like, I meet people and I'm kind of like, can I help you with anything? Or do you need any advice? Or can I, is there any way that I can be of assistance? Can I connect you with people? And I find that it's weird. I think if you put out good, it's like serendipity, you kind of put it out there and there's just been amazing opportunities, people that have come my way, people have asked me to join advisories, people have asked me to join another board. I met you. Like, and it's funny how we met because for me, I've been following you. So, Twitter. But it's Twitter, right? Twitter and, sliding into your DMs.
Yes. Bernadette slid into my DMs and we got on Zoom and we hit it off and we have become fast friends. Bernadette, where can people find you when they want to reach out to you?
Oh, where can people find me? In New Jersey?
Twitter.
You know what? Honestly, LinkedIn is probably the easiest place just because people can obviously always message me. And yeah, especially right now, you don't have to come to New Jersey to hang out with me, even though I'm one for like cocktail and social distance cocktail. But I'm always happy to connect with people. I think Zoom has made that easy, right? Mm-hmm. Having a 15-minute like get to know you conversation or ask for advice has become so easy. So yeah, certainly for sure. Hit me up on LinkedIn. I promise. I really do try to get back to people when they message me.
Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate you. Everyone, please like this video, subscribe, share, because Bernadette Aulestia has dropped some real gems here today, and I can't wait to share her story with the rest of the world. Thank you so much.
And vote, please.
And go vote, please.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. And congratulations to you too. I love everything you're doing. And I'm so excited about Cake Ventures.
Thank you.